The civil rights movement in mid-20th century America was a pivotal and transformative period in the nation's history. It aimed to end racial segregation and discrimination against African Americans and secure their full legal rights and equal treatment under the law. The movement encompassed various strategies, including peaceful protests, legal challenges, grassroots organizing, and acts of civil disobedience. Here is an overview of the civil rights movement. 1. Background and Jim Crow era. A. Segregation and discrimination. The United States was deeply segregated along racial lines in the mid-20th century. 1. African Americans faced widespread discrimination, particularly in the southern states, where Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation and denied basic rights. B. Early activism. Prior to the civil rights movement, there were early activists and organizations advocating for racial equality, including the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and its legal arm, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Circa NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, played a significant role in challenging segregation through legal avenues, including landmark cases such as Brown v. Board of Education, which led to the desegregation of public schools. D. Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. The SCLC, founded by Martin Luther King Jr. and other ministers, organized peaceful protests and civil disobedience campaigns to challenge segregation and advocate for voting rights. E. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, composed primarily of young activists, SNCC organized sit-ins, freedom rides, and voter registration drives to combat segregation and empower African American communities. 1. Key events and strategies. A. Montgomery Bus Boycott. The Montgomery Bus Boycott, led by Martin Luther King Jr., lasted for over a year and resulted in the desegregation of buses in Montgomery, Alabama. B. Sit-ins and freedom rides. Activists staged sit-ins at segregated lunch counters and conducted freedom rides to challenge segregated interstate travel, often facing violence and arrests. Circa March on Washington. The 1963 March on Washington brought together hundreds of thousands of people, culminating in Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous "I Have a Dream" speech, which called for racial equality and justice. D. Selma to Montgomery March. The Selma to Montgomery March in 1965, led by civil rights leaders including John Lewis, aimed to secure voting rights for African Americans and led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. 1. Legislative achievements. A. Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin and ended racial segregation in public places. B. Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 aimed to overcome barriers that prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote, such as literacy tests and poll taxes. 1. Impact and legacy. A. Desegregation and equality. The civil rights movement played a crucial role in ending legal segregation and paving the way for greater equality and civil rights protections for African Americans. B. Inspiration for movements. The civil rights movement inspired and influenced subsequent movements for women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and other social justice causes. Circa long-term challenges. While significant progress was made, challenges such as systemic racism and socioeconomic disparities persist, and the fight for racial equality continues today. Here are some prominent figures who played key roles in the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr., 1929 to 1968, perhaps the most recognizable face of the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist minister and civil rights activist. He advocated for nonviolent resistance and played a central role in organizing peaceful protests and demonstrations. King is best known for his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech delivered during the 1963 March on Washington. His leadership and activism ultimately led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Rosa Parks, 1913 to 2005. Rosa Parks was an African-American civil rights activist who became a symbol of resistance when she refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama, in 1955. Her act of defiance sparked the Montgomery Bus Boycott, a significant event in the civil rights movement that ultimately led to the desegregation of public transportation. Malcolm X, 1925 to 1965. Malcolm X, born Malcolm Little, was a prominent African-American Muslim minister and human rights activist. Initially associated with the Nation of Islam, he advocated for black separatism and self-defense in the face of racial violence and oppression. Over time, Malcolm X became more inclusive in his views and called for racial unity and equality. His assassination in 1965 cut short his evolving role in the civil rights movement. Thurgood Marshall, 1908 to 1993. Thurgood Marshall was a lawyer and jurist who played a significant role in the legal battle for civil rights. As the chief counsel for the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Marshall argued several landmark civil rights cases before the Supreme Court, including Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, which declared racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional. Marshall went on to become the first African-American Supreme Court justice, serving from 1967 to 1991. Medgar Evers, 1925 to 1963. Medgar Evers was a civil rights activist and leader of the NAACP in Mississippi. He worked tirelessly to desegregate schools, increase voter registration among African Americans, and fight against racial violence and discrimination. Evers was assassinated in 1963, becoming one of the movement's martyrs and galvanizing support for the ongoing struggle for civil rights. Ella Baker, 1903 to 1986. Ella Baker was a civil rights activist and organizer who played a crucial behind-the-scenes role in the movement. She worked with several civil rights organizations and was instrumental in establishing the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which organized youth-led protests and voter registration drives. James Farmer, 1920 to 1999. James Farmer was a civil rights leader and co-founder of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. He advocated for nonviolent direct action and organized the Freedom Rides in 1961, challenging segregated interstate bus travel. These are just a few of the many prominent figures who made significant contributions to the American civil rights movement. Their efforts, along with those of countless others, helped shape the course of history and advance the cause of racial equality in the United States. The civil rights movement was a transformative period in American history, challenging the nation to confront and address racial injustice. Its legacy continues to shape conversations around civil rights, social justice, and equality in the United States. Please support our channel, Vsauce, by subscribing and liking our videos. For more exciting, informative and educational videos, please enable bell icon for getting notification when we upload our new videos.